Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined by the managing editor of Horns247, Taylor Estes. And Taylor, first and foremost, I wish you and everyone listening a happy Thanksgiving. It is Thanksgiving week. It's actually Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. It's a short week for the Texas Longhorns coming off the impressive 55-14 win at Kansas, in which I think we described it as a warm day at the spa for the Longhorns and the fan base in a frigid game in Lawrence, Kansas. And now it is the end of the regular season. It will happen Friday at 11 a.m. Texas against Baylor, the final stop on the revenge tour. Taylor, remember that thing? The revenge tour?
Yeah, we heard about it, initially after that Oklahoma game, but they have not successfully gotten all of the stops on the revenge tour, but they definitely, have one more left. And happy Thanksgiving to you and to all of our listeners, Chip. But yeah, this is going to be a really big week. I mean, I can't believe that we're sitting here, Chip, and talking about a team that is 7-4 that still has an outside chance of playing for a Big 12 title. Can you?
How about that? If Texas handles business against Baylor, and Baylor woulda, coulda, shoulda won last week against TCU, I mean, just run out the clock, Blake Shapen. Just get a first down, Blake Shapen. But Baylor couldn't. They punted it back to TCU. They drove the field, kicked the 40-yard game-winning field goal with no time left to get out of there with a 29-28 win. But yeah, if Texas handles business against Baylor and Kansas can somehow, some way beat Kansas State in Manhattan in the Sunflower Showdown, then Texas would backdoor its way into the Big 12 title game and have a shot to be Big 12 champions, Taylor. But Kansas is an 11.5 point underdog.
Yeah.
And I mean, after watching them play against Texas last week and the way Will Howard's been playing at quarterback for Kansas State, unless something happens to Will Howard, could be a tall order for the Jayhawks. But who knows? It's a rivalry game. Crazy things happen in a rivalry game. We had a chance to talk to Steve Sarkisian and the Texas players on Monday, and there were some nuggets that we'll get to before we get into the actual Texas-Baylor showdown, because it is senior day, Taylor. And for a bunch of Longhorns, because of the COVID-19 season in 2020, when the NCAA awarded every student athlete who had a season an extra season, we have a bunch of players who have COVID-19 decisions to make, and you wrote about it this week.
Yeah, there is a number of players on the Texas roster that do have that. I would say most notably, some are Roshan Johnson, Christian Jones has one, Tavondre Sweat still has it, Moro Ojimo has it, Keandre Coburn, Jordan Whittington. He's technically considered a redshirt junior anyway because he had that redshirt year when he got injured his first season, but so he also does have a decision to make too. And I mean, this is going to be really interesting to watch. Texas officials put in the game notes for the Baylor game that they're expecting about 30 players to go through senior day festivities. In the past, that has not always meant that players will actually move on. If they do go through it, it's usually a pretty good sign of it. But I would say, Chip, the guys, that you're kind of watching right now that may use that extra year of eligibility are probably, the defensive linemen. I mean, Keandre Coburn, Moro Ojimo, and Tavondre Sweat have had really good seasons this year, probably better than what a lot of people expected. However, in talking to Keandre Coburn on Monday, he said that he's going to sit down with Bo Davis and really rely on him. He did that last year too, when he was deciding if he wanted to come back for another season or not. And Bo Davis essentially just said, like, here's what NFL teams look for. And he's a guy that has played or has coached, in the NFL, coached at a lot of different schools. Keandre said that whatever he tells him, essentially, he's going to listen to because he knows that he's looking out for his best interest. He did at one point, I thought was funny when he said that. He's like, if Coach Davis says I need to come back, I'll probably be like, no, not sad, but kind of like, dang, but if it's best for me and my family, I'm going to listen to what he has to say because he's always been real with him. So a lot of things to watch. I would say in talking to some of the players as well, Chip, it sounds like Roschon Johnson's mind is made up based off of the way he did answer the questions. A lot of these guys were kind of like, oh, we'll get to it when it happens, or, we're just focused on Baylor, which Roschon said too. But Roschon essentially told us that he's not, banking on additional COVID year. So this will probably be his last game. And, I more than likely Bijan Robinson's last game playing at home at Texas, Chip.
Yeah. It's it's going to be a monumental day. I think back to guys like Ricky Williams and Cedric Benson's last home game. I don't think Texas fans knew that Jamal Charles was playing his last home game. Jamal, that was a weird 2007 season where he almost got benched by Mac Brown for Vondrell McGee. And almost by accident, they rediscovered zone read when Colt McCoy went out for one play against Nebraska with an injury. John Childs came in. They ran zone read. Jamal Charles ran for 25 yards. And then to Greg Davis's credit, he ran zone read 15 times to finish the game. And Jamal Charles had 180 yards rushing in the fourth quarter and kind of resurrected his season. He ended up rushing for 1,600 yards that year, but he was done. And my God, he goes on to a career where he sets the NFL all-time record for yards per carry. And he's the guy I kind of compare Bijan Robinson to the most. Now, physically, they're different. Jamal is built like a track, more like a track guy with just crazy vision. I think his vision is like Gale Sayers. It's that good. But Bijan Robinson has that vision. He's got the power. He's got the hands, the balance, the contact balance. He's just, you have to grab 3 or 4 guys to kind of make the comparison with Bijan Robinson. So
yeah, he's amazing. Like an all-purpose back type of guy.
Right. But he can run past you. He can run through you. And we saw that in that Kansas game last week where he's trucking guys. Jordan Whittington told a funny story this week. He said, I'm blocking downfield. I look over my shoulder. I see 3 guys hit Bijan and he lets up. And then all of a sudden, Bijan's still going. He's like, oh, crap, I got to keep blocking my guy. And he's like, with Bijan, you're worn out because you have to block so hard down the field because you never know. You never know when he's going to bust it, cut back, zigzag, keep it alive, keep going. And we certainly saw that last week against Kansas. And so if he runs for 98 yards in this game, Taylor, he'll move past Jamal Charles into 4th place all time on UT's rushing list, behind only number 1 Ricky Williams, number 2 Cedric Benson, number 3 Earl Campbell. That's about where he should be. Yeah,
and all guys that played for 4 years at Texas. I believe they all were there for 4 years. So yeah,
Jamal only played 3. So he would be the top of the 3-year running backs at Texas. Yeah.
It's so crazy to me, Chip, to think that I feel like we haven't seen all of Bijan. You know what I mean? Because of the 2020 season, obviously he didn't get as many touches or carries earlier on in the year. Games. Yeah. And a shorter season. Yeah, you're right. And, that was it was the K-State game, obviously, that year that was kind of his coming out party. He pointed to one of his favorite runs was against West Virginia that season, where I think he I forget how he worded it, but he stiff armed some guy and but just the fact that I feel
he had spin move. That's
on that run. That's what it was. Yeah. So
He
he
still
said
thinks he
that's
was in bounds because he kinda started in the middle of the field, he stiff-armed a guy, he spun another guy, spun again, got to the sideline, and he was kinda tiptoeing down the line, and they said he stepped out. He's convinced he didn't.
yeah. But it just feels like he didn't really get a whole everything that you could have potentially gotten out of Bijan Robinson, which is kind of disappointing, I think, both for Texas fans. I would say also for Steve Sarkisian. I mean, he kind of got a gift in taking over a team that did have Bijan Robinson on it. Same with Tashard Choice coming in as running backs coach this year. I mean, what a running back room to coach, especially as a pretty not young coach, but kind of, younger in his assistant coaching career. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be, it's going to be kind of, I would say for us, probably a little sad for Bijan to have him move on because we've talked about him. I mean, he's just one of those guys that, like, even when he does interviews with us, I think I told the story a few weeks ago. He's just so genuine. He stays around, answers every question, shakes everyone's hands, gives people hugs. A few weeks ago came up to Chip and was like, "Hey man, I saw you in a documentary." Just things like that. And it's like, this is a superstar, and there's just very few guys like Bijan Robinson. It's been a pleasure to cover him. I hope he has a monster game against Baylor. And depending on Roschon Johnson's injury status, if he is able to go, it would be nice to also see him, have a breakout game too, because if just hearing Steve Sarkisian and all the players honestly talk about what Roschon Johnson has been for this locker room. I mean, Steve Sarkisian says when he talks to younger guys, he never has a conversation with a younger guy and talking about what guys need to be doing without mentioning Roschon Johnson, because he just does everything right. And Jordan Whittington probably said it best. The reason why everyone listens to him is because he is consistent. It's his consistency and everything that he does, the way he goes about his business every single day. It never changes. And there's going to be some big shoes to fill, not just from a talent standpoint from both of those guys, but also the leadership that Roschon Johnson brings that some guys are going to have to step up next year.
Yeah, for sure. And we're at that point where we're already starting to look ahead to next year. In fact, Roschon Johnson mentioned Quinn Ewers as a guy who could become that leader. And yet that came on the same day that Steve Sarkisian was asked about the quarterback position going into 2023 and if it will be wide open. Steve Sarkisian said, yes, we'll wipe the slate clean for the quarterback competition going into 2023. Of course, Arch Manning set to arrive in January. And Quinn Ewers was asked about that, and he said, yep, that's part of the deal, especially under Coach Sark. He said, I'm ready for all competition. But if you're Hudson Card, you're probably thinking, if I couldn't get into the Oklahoma State game when Quinn Ewers was going 19 of 49 passing, 38% completion rate with 3 interceptions. He did have 2 touchdown passes, but he had 15 overthrows in that game, which is the most in FBS in the last 3 seasons. If Hudson Card couldn't get into that game, he's got to be thinking that the writing's on the wall for him in terms of Quinn Ewers is Steve Sarkisian's guy until maybe either Malik Murphy or Arch Manning is ready, because those are Sarkisian's hand-picked guys. And we know with a offensive-minded head coach, quarterback developer like Steve Sarkisian, he's gonna bet on the guys that he picked, and whether that's fair or not. So Hudson Card, I know there's a lot of interest in Hudson Card. If he's interested in looking somewhere else, he'll graduate in December. He'll have at least 2 years of eligibility remaining. And then, Malik Murphy's a guy who I hope can get in the mix, because he is every bit of 6'5" and 225 pounds. I mean, he could be 6'6" now, Taylor. He's a giant, and everyone talks about that size, but he can spin it. We've seen him throw it in practice, and we just got to see how he processes this offense and processes the defense. He spent a lot of time on the scout team this year, which, look, Kyler Murray played scout team at OU the year he had to sit out and waited his turn behind Baker Mayfield. It can be productive, and you are getting live action in practice. It's not your offense, it's the other team's offense, but you're still getting that live action. Let's see. Malik Murphy had that ankle surgery from the broken ankle he suffered in his state championship game in December, and then he hurt his hand, wrist, in a scooter accident that had him kind of sidelined for a few games earlier in the season. So this coming up year, I put him in the mix, in competition with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. And don't forget Charles Wright. Charles Wright, another holdover from the Tom Herman era, is still on scholarship and came this close to playing against UTSA when both Ewers and Card were banged up. But Card gutted it out on that ankle and played. And so Charles Wright also will have, he's a scholarship quarterback in that room. So don't want to forget about him either.
Yeah. When you talk about Malik Murphy's size, Chip, I think back to a source of mine. I think it would have been spring practice earlier this past year. And he was standing by the gate where the team comes in. And he asked somebody, he's like, who's number 6 and why is he in a black jersey? And it was talking about Malik Murphy. And someone told him, yeah, oh, that's he's a quarterback. And he was like, no, that's not a quarterback. He's like, that's a tight end at best. Or like someone like, so that's how big he is. I mean, you see him and you're just like, he is, as you said, every bit of 6'5", if not 6'6" at this point. I mean, he's a big body. I would say, Chip, that he's probably would be more in the mix potentially for the quarterback competition than Arch Manning would be, which is not a bad thing. I mean, something that Texas fans need to remember, the Manning family is not pushing for Arch Manning to start year one as a true freshman. I mean, that is absolutely not what they want. And so, I know that some fans look at the signing classes and automatically are like 5-star, he needs to be starting and be an All-American day one that he steps on campus. That is like, trust the Manning family. They're the Mannings for a reason, and their name carries weight for a reason. And they think that the best, situation for Arch Manning, in addition to enrolling early, is to hopefully get that full redshirt year so that he gets his feet wet. And I would say a lot of that also has to do with probably the competition he has faced at the high school level. That's been one of the knocks people say about him, like, oh, his numbers aren't great and he doesn't play against good competition. I don't really care about that. I don't really care about numbers. He probably doesn't have the best team around him either, so to get a lot of numbers as a pro style quarterback. But, I think that'll really help him have the redshirt year. So Malik Murphy, we're assuming that Hudson Card moves on. He probably will. I mean, I would bet that he would, just based off of the way that the quarterback situation has been handled, especially this year when Quinn Ewers, as you mentioned, was kind of up and down. Sark didn't go to Hudson Card at all, but he definitely can start somewhere, probably day one at another Power 5 school. So assuming that does happen, Malik Murphy will definitely be one to watch. And it'll be interesting to see how his development has gone, because he was very raw coming in to Texas. He was a guy that only played a few seasons of quarterback at the high school level. I don't believe he played in 2020 because I think California canceled all high school football out there. He's from Southern California area. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see his development. But I'm going to ask you this. When you hear Sark say that it's open, do you really believe it's fully open, or do you think it's kind of like he needs to say that to keep the competition there?
Well, I think he says that to keep the competition there. I mean, obviously Quinn Ewers has the leg up because of him starting the majority of the games this season. He did miss a few games early in the year with that sternoclavicular sprain suffered against Alabama. But I think, so I think Ewers has the advantage of experience, and then we have to see how well Malik Murphy can process, because look at Drake May at North Carolina, Mac Brown's quarterback, who redshirted last year, came in this year, and might end up being, a Heisman finalist, if not a Manning finalist, with how well he was playing until North Carolina suffered that loss to Wake Forest. But and Jameis Winston won the Heisman as a redshirt freshman, Johnny Manziel. So you can really come on the scene if you understand the offense. And Sarkisian's offense it's um, it's extensive, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of terminology. I mean, you have to say a lot of things to call the play because you're also calling protections, you're calling motions, and and so it's a lot. And I want to see how Malik Murphy processes and when he's in the Texas offense, and that's going to be fun to watch because his personality, Taylor, everyone talks about it, that he's like the mayor already. As a true freshman, he's got one of the biggest personalities in the locker room. Everyone vibes with him, defense, defensive backs, defensive line, everybody. And so when I hear that, I think of a guy like Vince Young. And I'm not going
Mm-hmm.
to go there because Malik Murphy's more of a pro style passer, uh, but that personality goes a long way. Guys will play for him if he can produce on the field. So I'm fascinated by Malik Murphy, and of course his personality is completely different from Quinn Ewers, who's really quiet and hard to read at times.
Mm-hmm.
So this will be interesting, and of course Texas fans are over the moon excited about what Arch Manning's going to bring to the table. But you're right, the plan right now is for him to redshirt. So this is you have to kind of file that one as the caveat in the quarterback competition for 2023.
Yeah, and Quinn Ewers also, just real quick, Chip, he was asked about Malik Murphy, and he said he basically the tools that he said that stands out about him is he has a really, really good arm, but he also said he's really easy to be around. And I think that kind of plays into what you're saying. So even, the quarterback room acknowledges it too in his presence.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about Bijan Robinson and maybe him we're not getting everything out of him, because I did ask him, do you feel like you were underutilized at Texas? And he said, no, I did everything I could here, which
Yeah.
sounded kind of final. But think about the different, he had two different coaches, he had three different quarterbacks, two different running backs coaches, two different offensive coordinators, O-line coaches. There wasn't that stability and growth. Like he had 1 year of Sam Ellinger, 1 year of Casey Thompson, 1 year of Quinn Ewers. He didn't have that. He didn't get to grow with the quarterbacks so that they had that unbelievable rhythm and in sync ability. We've talked a lot of times on the Flagship Podcast here, week to week this season, how Quinn Ewers didn't see Bijan Robinson open in the flat, or and a lot of it is Steve Sarkisian's progression chart, which does start with the deep ball, and if that's available, he wants the quarterback to throw it. So, but I always go back to what Major Applewhite told me. He said, I became a good quarterback when I understood the importance of the check down. And Major Applewhite dumped the ball off to Ricky Williams a ton of times and just let Ricky Williams go. And that's the part that I think, especially looking back at games like Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, where Texas had double digit leads, 17-point leads in those games and didn't hold on. And man, having a guy like Bijan Robinson is supposed to be the closer.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that is just going to hammer that defense until they don't want anymore. And that didn't happen this year, and that's disappointing because we know we can do it. And obviously the TCU game was a bit of a nightmare for a lot of different reasons. But I mentioned to Bijan, I said, did you see that Baylor ran for 232 yards on TCU last week? And he was like, they did? And he was like, oh, I mean, he was pissed. So it's, that guy's so competitive and has given everything he can give to this university. My gosh, I don't think he's ever dropped a pass. So he's Devin Duvernay from that aspect. And he thinks back to the West Virginia game in 20 for that double spin move run that he had. I think back to Texas trying to end that game up 17-13, and the pass he caught from Sam Ehlinger coming off their goal line that he took for 38 yards to effectively end the game. And that was a huge moment for him because I don't think he'd caught many passes at that point, and he was as smooth as a senior on that
Yeah.
play, and it was big time.
I think the play that will always stand out to me is that run against OU last year, where I think he had he broke, I think, 10 or 11 tackles. I mean, there were guys that tried to tackle him multiple times and they couldn't get him down. I mean, that was one. I remember being in the press box of the Cotton Bowl and we were watching it. We were just like, good God, what is this? And then we were watching the replay and we are just counting it. Remember that? We were looking at my computer holy crap. I think he missed 11 or broke 11 or 12 tackles or something on a single run. It's that was something. Special, I'll say.
Yeah,
And I think Reggie Bush saw that and tweeted about Bijan on that run. And I think that's when he said, okay, number 5. I like that number too, with him wearing number 5.
that's right.
And that's the reason why Bijan actually wears number 5 is because of Reggie Bush. So
That's right. Yep. Bijan's he had a relative his grandfather, I think, who was a Pac-12 official, and so Bijan was always watching Pac-12 games, USC, and loved Reggie Bush. Yeah, you go back and look at some of the close games from that 2020 season, including that 4 overtime game against Oklahoma, where I think Bijan only had 12 carries. And you're like, man, you think if he had a little more than 12 carries, Texas might have been able to finish off that game in regulation. But
what's with 12 carries and Bijan Robinson, right? Didn't he have that against TCU too?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and this will be an interesting game because Baylor, and it makes me nervous when Sark says this kind of stuff, but he said, Baylor's got a really good run defense. We might have to lean on Quinn more than we did last week at Kansas. And Quinn said, hey, I was a game manager in the Kansas game. It was obviously a run heavy game plan. Steve Sarkisian told the sideline reporter before the game, number 5 better show up today. Of course he did. But when Sark says that kind of stuff, it makes me think, oh God, here we go again. Is he going to outthink himself instead of just getting his offensive line and in a room and saying, we're going to rip these guys apart for Bijan Robinson today, and let's go get it. And so we'll see. We'll see how this plays out because Baylor does have a pretty good defensive front, and Isaka Ika, their nose tackle, and Dylan Doyle, their linebacker, have been really good against the run this year. But it's Bijan Robinson,
Yeah. I mean, if TCU is able to rush for over 200 yards against them, I would put my money. If Steve Sarkisian sticks with running the ball, I would put my money on the running back room that Texas has at its disposal, led by obviously Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, and Baylor, Dave Aranda is a really smart defensive guy. They'll obviously watch what TCU did, and probably they probably have better personnel to try to mimic what TCU did than Kansas does, certainly. So this could be a more interesting game than what Texas is favored by 9.5 or 7.5.
I think they were 8.5 as of Tuesday morning.
That's right.
Yeah.
It opened at 7.5 and they've gone up to 8.5. So yeah, I mean, of course, I thought the Kansas game might be close, and this Texas defense is not messing around, Taylor. And that's, we should probably mention those guys because Jalen Ford this guy he comes up with another big interception, and his interceptions have been huge. The one against Iowa State turned the momentum of the game. The one against Kansas State helped finish off an unbelievable first half, because all three of his interceptions have led to touchdowns by Texas right uh, before the half. So his timing of giving his team momentum going into halftime has been fantastic, and so this Texas defense gets a Baylor team this week with a quarterback in Blake Shapen who's been turnover prone. He has not taken care of the football. Namely, Baylor fans are wincing at the fact that he had 1st and 10 from the TCU 11 right before halftime and threw an interception in the end zone. And, Baylor fans just were like, because they've seen this before. He got stripped against West Virginia, fumbled the ball. He got returned for a touchdown in a 43-40 loss to the Mountaineers in Morgantown. And he had 2 interceptions against K-State in a loss. He had 2 interceptions against Oklahoma State in a loss. So Texas leads the nation in quarterback pressures. They're going to have to get after Blake Shapen and make him think that Texas has 12 guys on the field and make him, cough up the football.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's shown that he can, so you got to get after him. And I would say Jalen Ford is another guy that, not for a COVID decision, but may have a decision to make after this year. I mean, he is draft eligible. He's a true junior, I believe. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's been arguably one of the top defensive players, I would say, at least in the Big 12. And how much better can you get from there? You know what I mean? I mean, if he's to, end the season with that honor, that can carry weight. And I feel like he's showed up in every game. He's made plays all over the field, not just as the team's leading tackler, as you said, it's come up with really key interceptions, key turnovers when they needed it, to be honest. And I would say he's definitely somebody to watch too, as someone at least with a decision on.
Yeah, he was asked about it on Monday, and he kind of hemmed and hawed and said, there will be a time for that. But he did say that he said, quote, "I still think there's a lot more or a lot for me to improve on." So who knows? Was that him? And he did talk about how he talked to Byron Murphy the other day about how, depending on who goes and who stays of those defensive linemen, how it could be him and Byron Murphy running the show on defense next year. So we'll see, but
Which wouldn't be too bad, right?
not too bad.
I mean,
Not too
those
bad.
are two guys that have very high ceilings, I would say.
Yeah, but I mean, so many guys have stepped up. Vernon Broughton stepped up this year.
Baron Sorrell.
Yeah, Baron Sorrell for sure. And you just got to think that next year is Alfred Collins' year. I mean, he had a big play against Kansas. He had a nice tackle for loss, and he has these flashes, but he's got to be more consistent. And Texas, depending on how many of those guys come back, good heavens, they could be. I mean, they're leading the nation in quarterback pressures this year. If all those guys came back, wow.
Yeah.
So we shall see.
It might be a tall order there to say. I think that they may be replacing. I mean, they obviously are going to be replacing some key players on the defensive side of the ball. Anthony Cook, Deshaun Jameson, DeMarvion Overshone. These are guys that don't have a decision to make. This will be their last home game. So, and they played a lot of football, so it'll be interesting to see kind of who steps up in their absence moving into 2023.
Yeah, and we should mention Terrence Brooks because he did, he played well against Kansas. That's the second time in a row that he's been where he's supposed to be, handling his assignments, playing physical. He's a strong kid for a freshman, and had a few struggles. Maybe wasn't as prepared as he should have been when he came into the Iowa State game, but has really picked it up. Like they used that bye week to stress to all the young players, you got to prepare like a starter. You can't think of yourself as a freshman who's not going to get in the game. You need to be preparing like a starter. And it looks like Terrence Brooks took that advice to heart because he's played well the last couple games, and it looks like he'll rotate with Deshaun Jameson, possibly even in this Baylor game because Jameson was cleared to play, but Brooks got the start, and Jameson played very little. Brooks played most of the game, so we shall see. But that's another positive note for a defense that has completely turned it around, and now looks like a defense that is part of the solution and doesn't get swept up in the here we go again type of stuff that we saw at Texas Tech, and even at Oklahoma State when guys got out of their gaps and got a little undisciplined at the worst possible time when Spencer Sanders is driving for the go-ahead points. But this defense has improved week to week, and that's what you want. And especially when you're seeing young guys making plays. But Jalen Ford, wow, wouldn't that be sad if he puts it all together, kind of like Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas was a redshirt freshman, and they got 2 seasons out of Earl, but man, he left as soon as he was draft eligible. So we'll see. And Baylor, Taylor, just finishing up on Baylor before we get to love it or leave it. You look at Baylor's defense. I mentioned up front, Siaka Ika, their nose tackle, and Dylan Doyle, but they've not been as good at the safety position. Baylor's been beaten for a lot of points. We've seen him mention the 43-40 loss to West Virginia. So let's see if Quinn Ewers can get into a rhythm, especially if Steve Sarkisian's going to put more on his plate and instead of just hammering the football with Bijan and Roschon. So Baylor's special teams erratic. They have attempted the fewest field goals of any team in the Big 12. They've only attempted 9 all year. They've made 7 of them. But they had a missed extra point that caused all their grief last week. I mean, then they had to go for 2. They didn't get it. That's why they were down by 3 or down by 2 at the end, and TCU could kick the game-winning field goal and win it 29-28. They do have a good return guy in Gavin. I always forget his name, but
Holmes.
Gavin Holmes. Yeah, Gavin Holmes. He's been good on punt returns. He's averaging 13.3 yards per return, which is even better than Xavier Worthy, and he does have a punt return for a touchdown this year. And he's one of their faster receivers, along with Monterey Baldwin, who's a guy who can break it and take it. So there'll be some challenges, but Baylor does not have the pass rush they've had in the past. They're second fewest sacks in the Big 12, and Texas done a really good job of protecting Quinn Ewers, who didn't get touched last week against Kansas. So, I like the matchup for Texas. They just need to make sure that on offense they're getting first downs, moving the ball, and getting in the end zone, and not having Bijan run for 7 yards and then throwing it incomplete on 2nd and 3rd down and punting.
Come on, it'll be throw on first down, Bijan second, throw. Just kidding.
Let's hope.
Hopefully I'm kidding. I'll say that.
I don't think Texas fans can take it after that offensive lack of showing against TCU. Remember they only scored 3 points in that game as an offense.
Yeah, and I will say this: if you look at the way that Texas has played this season, and I know it's a little bit different because it's a home game that they lost last in, but I feel like they haven't, at least recently, shown up the same way in the same scenario. You know what I mean? I feel like the Kansas game obviously was big to get that type of win on the road. The K-State win on the road, they started kind of turning it around. they need to come back, I would say, from the TCU game, the last time that they played on their home turf, in front of their home fans. I would be a little surprised if they came back out flat and have a performance like they did against TCU offensively, just because you haven't really seen them do that in back-to-back type of scenarios. I guess you could say technically Texas Tech, and then going on the road to Oklahoma State, but there was a number of games in between them too, where they weren't really showing repeat performances.
Well, they've won 2 in a row on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So they've gotten that piano off their back, and absolutely they finished the game against Kansas. So that's Baylor was up 28-3 on Kansas at halftime. So Baylor's a team when they're clicking, when Blake Shapen is on, they're scary because they can run the football. Richard Reese, the freshman sensation for Baylor, has been fantastic. And Craig Squirrel Williams, is averaging 5.8 yards per carry. So Baylor can run it. And Texas needs to make sure, once again, that they limit that damage and force Blake Shapen to throw it to beat him and get pressure on him, because he will give you the football. And I believe in this Texas defense, Taylor. I think that they'll do their job. I think they'll limit Baylor on the ground, and I think they'll get after Blake Shapen, and he'll probably turn it over a couple times, and I think Texas gets out of there with a 10-point win.
Yeah. Something just came in on email. So DeMarvion Overshone was a semifinalist for the Butkus Award. He did not make the finalist list. I just got an email from them. So Texas with no Butkus Award finalists. So just something there. But speaking of DeMarvion Overshone, real quick, Chip, I thought something funny. I'm not sure if you were over with him with the player interviews when he said this, but when we talked to the players on Monday, he said, he was asked about if they beat Baylor, what's his plans to watch where is he planning on watching the Kansas State game? Since, I think the whole team will have their eyes on the way that game plays out. And he was just kind of talking about it, and he was like, oh man, yeah, I'm going to be rooting for the Jayhawks. He's like, actually, after the game against Kansas, I was talking to some of the Kansas players, and I was trying to fire them up, like, come on, guys, let's go, let's go. And I thought that was really funny to hear him say that. He was literally trying to pump up the team that they just demolished to try to, get them ready for the next game too. I thought that was a funny story that Texas
I'm gonna
fans.
miss DeMarvion Overshone. He is hilarious.
Yes, he is.
Oh my gosh, he's hilarious. And I feel like we were robbed of his personality in that COVID season when we were on Zoom all the time, and because that kid is so funny and his teammates love him, and just how he's played with a reckless abandon, a love of the game this year that we haven't seen. And I hope he can find a spot somewhere, because he made that move from safety to linebacker. We talked about it here on the Flagship Podcast, that maybe his best year was 2 years ago, his freshman or whatever, the first year he moved to linebacker in 20. But he's put some good plays together this year, and he's certainly a freak of an athlete. So we'll see.
It makes you wonder. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I just get the feeling there's some guys who are thinking about leaving who shouldn't be thinking about leaving. I know Overshone doesn't have a choice, and I think the reason he came back was to show he could be an NFL player, an Isaiah Simmons type of Swiss Army knife, safety linebacker, outside linebacker, hybrid, special teams. He's really shown up on special teams, and he's going to have to make an NFL roster because of his special teams play, most likely. So, he's a guy who I think gets it now and prepares like a pro. Jordan Whittington is another guy who, I talked about, he's like, knock on wood, I'm going to make it through this whole season. And I said, do you think that's because of how you've done the extra work, gone in for the cold tubs, hot tubs. And he's like, yeah, but I probably should have been doing that all along. And
Hmm.
so it takes a minute for these guys to truly understand what it means to prepare like a pro. Because once you get to the NFL, I mean, Emmitt Smith, who is the NFL's all-time leading rusher, gives as much credit to his career to his chiropractor as he does to any player or coach he was with. You have to take care of your body, and Jordan Whittington has learned, and so has DeMarvion Overshown. So we'll see if these other guys can figure it out as well, and that's all part of it. It's all part of becoming a consistent winning program. And
Yeah.
that's certainly something Texas is striving to do once again.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you ready for some love it or leave it, Taylor?
I am. Before we get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break, but stay with us because we have plenty more preview talk as Texas prepares for the regular season finale home game against Baylor Friday at 11 a.m. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will continue on here. If you are not a member of Horns 24/7, you got to get on it now because we have the deal of the year. It is a Black Friday special. We are starting the special a few days before Black Friday, but new members will get 75% off their first year of Texas Insider Scoop at Horns 24/7. So that is, I don't even know what the math is, like 20 something bucks for 12 months of VIP coverage of Texas. Obviously, a lot of recruiting stuff going to be happening coming up with early signing period in December. And then also Texas basketball ranked number 4 in the country coming off of that win against Gonzaga. So a lot of things ahead. And now is definitely the time to join Horns 24/7, get the annual membership, and you'll get 75% off your first year of VIP Texas Scoop. Plus, you get to read all of the other teams' message boards, especially when they're fun to watch. I think Texas fans enjoy it when there's meltdowns because it's not their team that people are melting down. So you get access to all of the VIP content across the across the 24/7 Sports Network. Excuse me. So
Yeah, which
get
is
on that.
awesome. You know, you're
Yes.
getting all the VIP content. LSU, Alabama, Ohio State, all the USC, all the premier programs, and 75% off. That is easily the best deal of the year. So
I
if
think it's
you're,
like 233 a month or something like that is
yeah,
what the breakdown is.
it's
Something along those lines.
less than a latte.
Yeah.
Uh,
Way less.
Way less for all the best content on the Longhorns. And if you're a member at another site, we just want to be one of the sites that you're a member of, because we feel like we bring, um, you know, scoop that you're not going to read anywhere else, and analysis, and just fun, the fun factor. So jump in if you've been on the fence. Jump in to Horns 24/7. All right, Taylor, you ready?
Yes. All right, Chip. My first love it or leave it for you is love it or leave it. West Virginia's Tony Mathis has had the best rushing performance against Baylor with 22 carries for 163 yards and 2 touchdowns. Bijan Robinson will run for more. Love it or leave it.
Wow, this is actually a tough one. Um, I mean, my my gut instinct is that it'll be close, but especially if Sark doesn't, if Sark puts the ball in Quinn Ewer's hands too much, I'm just hoping that Bijan gets to 22 carries in this game. But if he does, I think he'll surpass 163 yards. At halftime of Kansas, he had 19 for 172.
I believe so, yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna ride this wave. I'm gonna love this. Um, Something tells me that Sark may not get 22 carries for Bijan, but I hope that's the case. And if he does, I think he will surpass 163 yards and a couple of touchdowns. So Taylor, I'm gonna love this. I hope Steve Sarkisian's listening to the Flagship Podcast, so that you know he'll look out for Bijan. How about you?
Yeah, I kind of am on the fence a little bit too. It's going to be dependent on how many carries, how many touches he actually is going to get. I believe the early forecast, I haven't checked recently, so don't quote me. Well, I guess weather people never get called out for being wrong, but I think the early forecast was supposed to be potentially rainy on Friday. If that's the case, obviously, I think that Steve Sarkisian will go with the running game more. Obviously, that would be the smart move. I'm pulling it up right here real quick. There's a 55% chance of rain early in the day. So if it is raining on Friday, I think Bijan will be getting a lot of carries. So I'll love it. And I also am kind of loving it as like, I hope that does come to fruition because this is quite possibly Bijan Robinson's not just last home game at Texas, last final showing at all for Texas, depending on his decision if he's going to play in a bowl game or not. And I imagine if Texas misses the Big 12 title game, he probably would sit the bowl game. I bet his agent would say that. I think all of us would probably say that to him too. To be honest, it's not playing for a national championship. Don't risk it. So yeah, I'm going to love it and hope that that does come to fruition.
All right, number 2.
Second one, love it or leave it. Jalen Ford, who leads the Big 12 in forced fumbles with 3 and is second in tackles with 96 and interceptions, 3 also, should be named Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year.
You know what? I'm going to love this. I don't know that he will win this because he came out of nowhere this year. And there were guys like Tyree Wilson at Texas Tech and, Felix Anyuduke Uzama at Kansas State, who came in with a lot more fanfare. But Jalen Ford, by leading the Big 12 in forced fumbles, we haven't even talked about his forced fumbles, and the fact that he's second in tackles and second in interceptions shows just how versatile he is. And then when you look at the improvement of the Texas defense, um, I think it's absolutely warranted for him to win Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. And I get it if they end up giving it to Tyree Wilson or Krishan Merriweather at Tech. Although Tyree Wilson's hurt, and so he's not even playing in these last couple of games. I just think Jalen Ford, his impact, if people really look at it, and the fact that his turnovers forced have had such a big impact in the game. He's also recovered 2 fumbles. I'm gonna love this. I'm gonna love this. I think he's got the numbers to back it up, and the timeliness of his big plays has been huge. Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, well, isn't this voted on by the coaches in the league?
Yes.
So that to me makes me think he has a better chance because these coaches have seen it. They've seen it against their team.
Right.
They've seen him, getting the interceptions, the forced fumbles. If this was a media vote, I would be like, he probably deserves it, but isn't going to get it just because Texas is not very good at promoting their players. I don't understand it because a lot of awards, national awards out there, we vote on. Like honestly, like we vote on, the Maxwell Award. There's a number of them. If you're a member of Football Writers Association of America, you have votes on there. Tons of schools send out, pamphlets, information about their players to all Football Writers Association of America voters, and Texas never does. And it's kind of like, I know you think maybe the media relations team thinks like they don't have to, but it's like you're middle of the pack team. Not everyone knows who your players are. So all that to say, I would say that since this is voted on by the coaches, I think it probably will come to fruition. But no doubt in my mind, he should be named the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. So I will love it as well.
Think about that. Think about where we were talking about the linebacker position coming into the season. What a question mark it was because, last year you had Luke Brockermeyer starting at middle linebacker. He tears his ACL. And Jalen Ford, that might have been the step in the process that he needed to get pushed to the forefront in spring ball. And then coming out of spring, summer, going into Big 12 media days, all of his teammates were saying Jalen Ford. And here we are. So
Yeah.
kudos.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And kudos to Jeff Choate, the linebackers coach, who, held Jalen Ford accountable. Jalen Ford said he wanted to be great. And Jeff Choate said, well, if you want to be great, then you got to prepare better. You've got to be in the film room. You got to know what you're looking at. And Jalen Ford has done that. He is one of the most prepared players on the field every week.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. Like, this is a huge credit both to Jeff Choate and to Pete Kwiatkowski. I mean, the two of them coached, Choate's more inside linebackers. Kwiatkowski is outside, but just a further showing of their impact on this defense this season too.
Yeah.
All right. Final one, Chip. Love it or leave it. Kansas, an 11.5-point underdog, pulls off the upset at Kansas State on Saturday night.
There's no way this happens unless something happens to Will Howard. I mean, Adrian Martinez is hurt. I look back now and feel better about my statement going into Texas's game with K-State that if Adrian Martinez plays, Texas wins. If Will Howard plays, I don't know if Texas wins. Will Howard did it again. I mean, he crushed Baylor in Waco, 31-3. This guy he's on fire, and he handled business against West Virginia last week. I just think he's too much right now for that Kansas defense, which is, a bit of a mess. I think there's a reason DeMarvion Overshown was trying to talk those boys up into giving them some confidence, maybe some secrets about how to slow down Deuce Vaughn and whatnot. But Taylor, unless something happens to Will Howard, I see Kansas State winning this game. So I'm going to leave it. How about you?
I am too. Sorry, Texas fans, but yeah, I think it's at Kansas State too, correct?
Yeah, it's in
Yeah,
Manhattan.
I totally agree with what you said. I don't really need to repeat it exactly, but yeah, as a great of a story that would be for Kansas. I don't know when the last time they beat Kansas State in football was, but that would be a great story. I just don't see it happening, so I'm gonna have to leave it. So maybe TCU and K-State in the Big 12 title game. That's essentially what you and I are saying at this point. So we'll see. And who knows? Miracles can happen. Rivalry games. You never know what's going to happen. Rivalry week. This is a far improved Kansas team than years past. I would also say it's a far improved Kansas State team too. So I think it could be a good game, but no, I'm going to have to go with instinct, and my instinct says K-State.
All right. There you have it, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope everyone has a safe and happy Thanksgiving. For Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the faith.